Hi everyone, here we are, part two of our PowerPoint for the first chapter of Lumen and on our course. So we have the theory of evolution. So evolution is the thought that organisms change over time, and they do this for many reasons, whether it's the population of its species, whether they're predators, whether a hurricane or tsunami came, but that organisms are changing over time. It could be genetic. Maybe a good gene or a bad gene came through. So this is the theory of evolution. Gregor Mendel was the biggest scientist ever about basically natural selection and evolution. He thought we can't have descent, so someone descending through all the generations without a modification. So he called it descent without modification. And so what he thought was that organisms like humans evolve over time, and it's inevitable. It's going to happen no matter what. And there's three things in nature. So without us getting involved and using our science and making labradoodles and 15 other types of dogs, is that he said three principles happen in nature. One is that most characteristics of organisms are inherited or they're passed from parents to offspring. Maybe it's height, maybe it's being a good runner, maybe it's a good hunter. So most of these traits are inherited from the parents. More offspring are produced than are able to survive. So what if you have a litter of 15 kids? They're probably not going to survive. And you wouldn't probably survive either. So these resources for survival and reproduction are limited. So competition for resources happens in every generation. So if you were to have 15 babies, how could you feed them all? You might not be able to. Think about if you're a dog and you had so many puppies. Could you feed them all? So this is another thing of modification to descent. The last thing is that offspring vary among each other in the characteristics that they inherited. And you can tell that with your own siblings, if not your children. I know with my sister, she's not a good runner, but I'm a good runner. So if we lived back in the day, she might get eaten and I wouldn't because I'd be running faster away and they would eat the slower one, right? So offspring, whether it's an animal, a human, or whatnot, that usually offspring vary even just a little bit from each child to the next one. Here's our natural selection. Darwin loved birds. He traveled around the world on a boat called the Beagle, and he was going to be so many different things in life, and a doctor, and a substitute teacher, and a priest, and all these things. So he started to study science, like the scientific method. He had a hypothesis and said, the birds on the mainland and a bird on an island down by Africa are different. I wonder why. There's the question. So he says all birds are different. So what he does is he does natural selection. He's wondering if species are naturally selected for the environment. So birds on the mainland might have that big beak to survive better, and all the little beaks die. Maybe on the island, they need little beaks for the food they're eating, and all the big beaked birds, they die. So this is natural selection. It leads to adaptation in the species. Survival of the fittest. Maybe the birds that have no beaks all survive, all the other ones die. So that's a way of natural selection. Evolution is this driving force behind natural selection. So as species and their genes are organized and the fittest survive, he's saying in the background, this is what evolution is about. We're evolving with organisms over time with the variations in our genes. Diversity, so having different offspring, different genes, happens through sexual reproduction. So diversity can't happen with SpongeBob. When he copies himself some buds, he looks all the same and has a crazy laugh, right? We can't have it with asexual reproduction with starfish because you chop off a leg, it grows just like the other one. There's no change, there's no diversity. The genes are the same. So the only way to have diversity in evolution is through sexual reproduction. So you need a male and a female. So as environment change, selection changes too, and it differs. So what if it rains all the time, like it's raining out my window? What if it's raining all the time? Will humans have webbed feet and fingers? If it's dry all the time, will we get more scaly like lizards? So Mendel thought that different scientist, Darwin thought that as environments change, genes change over time to help the organism. Now, it doesn't mean if we need to make Noah's Ark right now because it's rain and then my next child has flippers. That's not it at all. This takes multiple generations, hundreds of years, sometimes thousands. Typically, you don't have a genetic change the next generation, that baby you just had. It takes a long time. And depending on how big the organism, how complex their order is, remember the order and the reproduction and everything for the properties of life, their order might be complex. That could take thousands or millions of years. So if they're a more simple organism, they can change quicker. How do we know that evolution, natural selection has happened? Well, we have fossils, right? We have scientific evidence that organisms existed that aren't found today. Thank goodness. Can you imagine? So these fossils provide us a show of evolution over time. Think about, you hear alligators and crocodiles were around the time of the dinosaurs. Well, they were slightly different then than they are now. Now they've changed about this much, but they have changed slightly. Interesting to see with this. What about humans? What about horses? So look at all these horses. Think about elephants, the mastodon and the mammoth, like Ice Age, the woolly mammoth, with those animals, elephants derived out of it. Now, elephants are shorter and hairless with smaller tusks, where mastodons and mammoths were huge beasts. Same with horses. Horses look much different. Horses are related to giraffes. Giraffes have 6 vertebrae in their neck, just like we do, and just like other organisms, but they're bigger and they're stretched, and they evolved from horses. What do you think? Maybe to eat the tops of trees to survive? Those with long necks evolved and survived. So this is all Darwin's thought of evolution. Look about this. These arms and wings are very similar to each other. They're called homologous or homologs. Homo should sound similar to you because homo means the same, right? We hear that in society all the time. Well, homologous is showing that it's the same structure. So if you look at these structures, the red is the same in all of these arm bones. The white is the same in all these arm bones. So what this means is we must have evolved from similar organisms. Like when we look at an animal tree, humans and dogs must have eventually came from a similar ancestor. So this is the radius and ulna on the human, the radius and ulna on a dog, on a bird, and this is a whale. You also have the wrist bones on the human, the dog, the bird, and the whale, and the phalanges, we call fingers, on all these organisms as well. So they're all very similar, and they're called homologous structures. So structures that are similar in all organisms. Moving on. There's some other things to learn about evolution, but just to give you the overall concepts. There's also embryology. Did you ever look at an embryo from a chicken, a dog, and a human, and at certain stages of that egg, they all look the same? So the human looks like a chicken looks like a dog, because we're all from the animal kingdom. This is called embryology. You're studying the diversity of species, but in a certain stage of development, we all look the same. As we go down here, molecular biology, talk about theories, misconceptions, another thing in your chapter about evolution. So kind of misinformation about evolution, that you think individuals just have mutations that they carry. Well, that's not the case anymore. Mutations usually have a response to the environment or something going on. An extra toe, maybe because there's extra pressure on the foot, or a bigger heel, or that sort of thing. So things just didn't happen. It was in the DNA. It was in there. We could test it and we could find it, is what some of the misconceptions were. Let's see what else I want. Oh, and that's the last of it. So that's all of the PowerPoint. Hopefully all of this information helped keep things a little more straight, make things a little more understandable for you. We get a little more evolution next week, but at least for this entry of this first week, you have a little bit of what evolution is, where it came from, how it's not just a theory, some misconceptions for it, and all kinds of good information. So again, if you have any questions, just message me. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. All right, take care.